Welcome. Today, we're here with Matt Alberg and Luis Buenaventura. We're going to speak to Luis about crypto in the Philippines. Luis is the co-founder of Bloom. He's the co-author of the Little Bitcoin book. And he also is an NFT artist on Maker's Place. Luis, welcome. How are you today?
Thanks so much, guys. It is very much the evening for me here in Manila. So we're GMT +8. I believe we are the reverse of your time zone. So I'm always kind of in these calls where everyone looks like they're just starting their day with their first cup of coffee. I'm on my second whiskey. That's a very common kind of occurrence for me.
I'm on my
Awesome.
second whiskey too, but you know.
Luis, I wanted to start with my first question, which is what's the regulatory climate for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency like in the Philippines? Is the government accepting of it? Are they prohibitive? What's it like
Sure.
on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, like we started very similarly to all countries, right? It was kind of like a gray area where the government wasn't really sure what to do with it. I'm talking about like all the way back in 2014. But as of 2017, there actually is a regulatory framework that is available that you can apply for as a we here in the Philippines we call it a virtual currency exchange license. Um, you can apply for it. If you get it, you will be basically allowed to kind of carry out fiat to crypto trades, which is one of the things that my company does. Yeah, there's at least about a dozen or so companies that have similar licenses thus far. And it's been that way for about 4 years now. I would say that the government is very like open to the idea of cryptocurrencies and financial innovation, financial inclusion, and all of that stuff. Although I would be less inclined to say that if we were just talking about the commercial banks. Because as you can probably guess, those two things are not the same, right? So just because the regulators are okay with it on principle doesn't necessarily mean the banks are okay with it in practice. And I believe that's the same in most countries around the world too.
So getting this license, how extensive of a process is it? Is it costly or is it actually pretty simple?
I would say that it wasn't costly in terms of money. It was costly in terms of time. It took us over a year to get our license. There are a lot of hoops that we had to go through. There were no real costs in the sense that it's not like they had I mean, there's a bond, to kind of prove that you have some financial capacity, but that's pretty standard. I mean, even if we were just a foreign exchange company, there would be similar requirements. But mostly it was just that, we were the third company in the country to get it. They just didn't really know what to do with us, right? So it just took a while to get things going.
Do you have an idea of how many companies have got this license so far in the Philippines?
I believe it's 15 now. 15, 1
okay.
5. Mm-hmm.
Can you rattle off some of the bigger ones?
Well, CoinsPH is the one that most people remember. They were one of the first big ones here in the Philippines. There's another order book exchange called PDAX. That was, I believe, the fifth company to receive their license. So those are the ones that you'll kind of see a lot about. Like if you look at the Philippine ecosystem, it's CoinsPH, it's Bloom, and then it's PDAX. Those are the companies that are kind of most visible.
Luis, how easy is it for someone in the Philippines to convert their Bitcoin into Philippine pesos? Is it difficult or is it a pretty seamless process?
It's fairly easy if we're talking less than $1,000 in value. And kind of there's a lot of different reasons for that. But suffice to say that the banking infrastructure here is only instant if we're talking about small amounts of money. And our definition of small amounts is $1,000 or less. So yes, if you had $1,000 worth of Bitcoin and you wanted to turn that into peso, pretty easy. You either go to BloomX or you go to the CoinsPH app or you go to PDAX or you even go to peer-to-peer. We've got a lot of peer-to-peer stuff going on here. And they will be able to deliver your pesos to you in minutes. Like we're talking 2 to 3 minutes or something like that. So very quick. As you go up the ladder, kind of larger amounts of money, it gets a little bit more tricky. But for the average person, we're talking like a couple of minutes of effort. Pretty simple.
You need to have a bank account for that quickness, though, right? So
Uh,
do most Filipinos have bank accounts?
So you need to have, at the very least, a mobile money wallet. So if you don't have a bank account, mobile money works. We've got a couple of those players here. There's three big ones. The banking penetration is still only it's under half, right? It's maybe about 35% or so. The mobile wallets have actually, kind of made some pretty significant strides in the last year, mostly because everyone was stuck at home and during the lockdown, right? So suddenly everyone had time to learn how to use digital money. So that's been a boon for not just e-commerce, but also for the crypto industry, because suddenly all of our transactions and trades and stuff like that, it can actually happen purely online without having to kind of do any of this, kind of physical logistics and stuff like that.
And can you use these mobile wallets at pretty much any store? Like you can buy groceries with your mobile wallet and you can pay your electric bill with your mobile wallet, etc.
So I'm speaking to you guys right now from the capital city. I'm in Metro Manila, but I actually live up in a beach town up north, about 4 hours drive from here. So it's pretty remote. Every single restaurant there accepts mobile money. Kind of weirdly, I have less cash in my wallet when I'm up there than when I'm down here for some weird reason. So yes, it's very pervasive, and with kind of the more rural operations, they had nothing to begin with. They didn't have kind of credit card POS machines or any of that stuff. So
They did the
being able
leapfrog
to
thing.
accept, yeah, exactly. So it was a leapfrog situation where, kind of they went from cash bills directly to mobile money for a lot of these very small businesses in kind of the rural parts of the country. At least that's how I've observed it.
I've heard that at 7-Eleven, like every 7-Eleven, you can buy or sell crypto for cash. Is there like a lot of Bitcoin ATMs everywhere in the Philippines, or are they pretty rare?
So, I mean, I guess it depends on kind of how much detail you want to go into there. So technically, you're not actually buying or selling it from the 7-Eleven. What you're actually doing there is you are using 7-Eleven as an on-ramp, but you're actually trading with CoinsPH. So what you're actually doing there is, CoinsPH has a partnership with 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven is accepting the pesos on their behalf, or 7-Eleven might be disbursing the pesos on their behalf. But technically, the trade is not being executed on 7-Eleven. There's no kind of 7-Eleven trading house or anything like that, as far as I can tell. Yeah, we don't have a lot of ATMs. We've got a couple that I'm aware of, and they're both in the same city, literally within blocks of each other. I think the reason for the lack of this is mostly because ATMs are kind of regulated kind of at the same level as banks here, and which kind of makes an ATM operator kind of business a little bit untenable unless you've got like a massive amount of capital to throw around. So what does become very big here are things like peer-to-peer, kind of these very informal kind of trades, because people who got stuck at home during the lockdown, maybe even lost their jobs during the lockdown, they've actually been very actively looking for other sources of income. So the reseller market for cryptocurrencies here, Bitcoin, Tether, Ethereum, all of that stuff, super strong. Like it's a massive growth area.
So
Okay.
these peer-to-peer exchanges, do they require that crypto license or not?
Well, so the peer-to-peer exchanges are not local companies, right? So the examples that I gave earlier, Paxful, local Bitcoins, Binance has a peer-to-peer marketplace that's kind of, in-house. So those are all very popular here. None of them actually have presence in the Philippines. They're just internet websites, right? So the actual people who are using them, I mean, that's on them, however they want to
Right.
use it, but Paxful itself does not actually execute any trades, right? So they're kind of a meeting place, a virtual meeting place, so to speak. But there's enough people who have kind of discovered this stuff and turned it into basically their livelihood, to kind of use Bitcoin as a means to keep themselves afloat during the lockdown. And it's been kind of very interesting to watch all of this stuff develop very organically, very grassroots.
Would you say the majority of the trading in the Philippines is taking place on peer-to-peer exchanges rather than exchanges like CoinsPH?
I would say that a very large majority is definitely taking. So those numbers are not revealed, right? So as far as I can tell, the only peer-to-peer marketplaces that actually share their numbers are Paxful and Local Bitcoins. You can see that on CoinDance if you wanted to look it up. It's very easy to just see it. Unfortunately, Binance P2P doesn't do that, and I have a feeling that they're actually a very significant chunk of the market. Whenever Bloom kind of attempts to sell supply, excess supply on Binance P2P, we can't even maintain an offer for longer than half an hour. We usually get sold out almost instantly. So there's a lot of traffic over there, and because they don't share their numbers, it actually makes it very hard for me to estimate exactly how big a chunk they are. But my sense is that a lot of I would say the vast majority of trades happening in the Philippines are happening via these informal connections, either peer-to-peer or some kind of OTC that doesn't necessarily have to have a licensed party on either end.
Aside from the actual platforms, the peer-to-peer platforms, are there also a lot of like informal WhatsApp or Telegram groups that are also organized and kind of done on a trust basis with the administrators?
Yes, for sure. Telegram, very big here. Viber also, weirdly. But yes, Telegram for sure. I would say that Telegram is where you would end up if you were talking kind of, let's say, in the $20,000 range or higher, right? So kind of the more exotic amounts, because most people don't sit on 5 BTC to trade per day, right? So that would happen in these Telegram groups where you would have to have multiple people vouching for you, and stuff like that. So kind of quite similar to the early days of Bitcoin. Just that the Bitcoin price is a hell of a lot higher than it used to be back then. We're still kind of doing those same methods still kind of work quite well over here.
So the peer-to-peer platforms, you're saying they tend to cater to a little more of a retail audience buying smaller amounts, whereas the Telegram peer-to-peer groups, they cater to more the business use case or the higher volumes. Why do you think one group goes to one platform and the other group goes to the other?
Well, so the peer-to-peer platforms will usually have some kind of compliance restriction. They're not going to necessarily stop a very big trade from happening, but they will ask certain questions. They'll have additional requirements that complicates things, right? So, and it's good to remember that a lot of these trades are not necessarily just between one Filipino to the other. We've got a very large population of Chinese traders, Korean traders, Japanese traders. North Asia comes down here when it's cold up there and spend the summer here, right? So there's a lot of relationships that are just kind of year-long, kind of, we've got a lot of Chinese interests here, not just infrastructure, but like even just things like manufacturing and things like that. So there's a lot of overlap, and the necessity for kind of having a longer conversation with your trading partner, it's just easier on Telegram, right? And then once you've built a little bit of trust, then the thing is like, oh, okay, yeah, I've traded with this guy before. I can vouch for him. He and his group are trustworthy. You guys can trade. It'll be okay, right? So social norming and social credibility are all very important when kind of that's the ecosystem that you're powering.
And then back to Ricardo's original question. So if we lump all the peer-to-peer platforms plus the WhatsApp, the Telegram groups, if we group those together, and then we group together the CoinsPH and your company and the other companies with the licenses, of those two main groups, which ones do you think are seeing more volume as a whole?
So I can't see the numbers of CoinsPH or PDAX. They don't really share that. I can tell you that. So my sense is that it's 60-40 in favor of kind of peer-to-peer and the whole informal kind of trading thing. That's my sense. That's my sense based on kind of customer conversations and stuff like that. Yeah. But like I've got no data to kind of really because no one's gonna share that data, right? I mean, there's no way to really see it.
I wanted to ask you, Luis, is mining like still viable in the Philippines? Is electricity cheap enough? Are there mining farms?
No, not for
Okay.
Bitcoin for sure. No, no, no. We're nowhere near what you would need for Bitcoin. I assume there's still a couple of like, I forget my terminology now, but kind of not proof of work for sure, not Bitcoin for sure. The other stuff possibly. But yeah, we're not competitive when it comes to electricity costs. We're not competitive. So there's a very, very small mining community here, and it's mostly enthusiasts. And I don't think they're doing it kind of at the scale that you would really need to make a dent.
Another question I wanted to ask you is, the Philippines is one of the largest U.S. remittance markets. Are people sending Bitcoin? Is it easier and cheaper?
So I guess okay. So that's a kind of a bigger question. My company, when we first started back in 2015, the vision for our company was to become a Bitcoin remittance bridge into the Philippines, right? And yeah, you're correct. The Philippines, on average, receives about $32 billion worth of remittances per annum, and that's to kind of put that into perspective, our GDP is only about 270. So, it's a little over 10% of our GDP that is kind of reliant on outside sources. So it's a big problem. It's the kind of problem that you really want to try to optimize. I don't think that there's a very big Bitcoin use case for remittances here. And I think that what's happened over the last couple of years, especially, is that more and more remittance companies are starting to look at stablecoins to kind of fill that need. They need something faster, but the volatility of Bitcoin gives people pause. I think that's kind of the main problem there. I've spent a good 4 or 5 years of my life trying to educate money transfer operators on how to use this stuff safely, right? And I'm talking about Bitcoin specifically. With mixed success, we managed to get a few customers, enterprise customers, to use our rails, which is basically a Bitcoin liquidity bridge. But we've not managed to really convince any of the really big ones. Those same ones are now looking at it again, but they're looking at it with stable coins as the thing to use, right? So like USDC or maybe Tether to a lesser extent, but I mean, I feel like USDC is just friendlier for a lot of compliance departments. And you got to remember that it's not just a technology problem. If it was a technology problem only, then we would have figured this out like years ago. The problem is that you have to convince every department in that money transfer operator company, right? And that includes their compliance. And their compliance is skittish about anything that looks like Bitcoin for various reasons. Whether that's correct or not, there's not much we can do about it. But if the compliance blocks it, doesn't matter if the CEO wants to do this. They can't override their compliance department, typically. So the kind of, a lot of these companies are now looking at, the stablecoin solution to see if there's a thing there. They're looking at not just the obvious ones like USDC, but they're looking at like Celo or CUSD, I think is they're looking at stuff like that. Because basically any of these stable coins are viable as long as there's a liquidity partner on the other end that can turn it into pesos for them. So that's kind of the scenario whereby these guys would actually start to really take this stuff seriously.
So if I'm a Filipino American and I'm sending USDC back to the Philippines, somebody in the Philippines has to be like a willing recipient of this USDC. And let's assume that actually is the case. Where are they going to spend the USDC once they have it?
They typically won't spend it. What they'll do is they'll just convert it immediately. So USDC just becomes another bridge.
So how do you convert the USDC to US dollars? I assume you're saying they convert it to US dollars?
Well, they would go directly. So go USDC to Philippine peso. So let's go back to your original scenario, right? So you're in the States, I'm here in the Philippines. You send me $100 USDC. I receive it in my BloomX wallet. Shows up as 100 USDC. I flip a switch. It turns into, I guess that would be 44,800 pesos. And then it's just literally pesos, right? So it's pesos that I pull out. take it and like turn it into like I move it over to my mobile wallet, and then I spend it
But
at the
where was
7-Eleven.
that USDC traded though? It had to go somewhere after that exchange for the pesos, right?
Right. Well, because in my case, I was using kind of Bloom's own technology, right? So we're a market maker for all of this stuff. So we're absorbing the cryptocurrency that is coming in from our customers,
And
and
you're selling
we're
it on whatever
yeah,
crypto markets you can.
yes, exactly, right. And
Mhm.
we're in like 5 different big ones overseas, and that's where we're liquidating the position. And
So
I imagine that the other guys are doing kind of similar things.
so you have overseas accounts on these on big exchanges, and you're selling your USDC there, and then those folks, if they want to, can convert that to real US dollars. But
Right.
most of the time, it's probably just floating around in the
Yeah.
USDC economy or whatever. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I mean, USDC for us is as good as anything, right? Because I can turn it into Bitcoin if someone wants to come along and buy Bitcoin from me, or whatever, right? I can use it to facilitate other trades. So stable coins are valuable for us because we can. Uh, that's basically what runs the business right now. Because when some guy comes along and he says, "I want to buy zero point 0.1 Bitcoin from Bloom," I need to have some ready USDC or USDT to kind of execute that actual trade, because I'm not holding that Bitcoin in real time. I'm actually buying it when the guy comes over to us to, requesting for a quote or whatever. So yeah, that's roughly how it's always worked for us. And I believe that it would be very similar for, kind of our other compatriots that are kind of in the same business.
Um, I looked up just the Western Union transfer rate from the US to the Philippines. It
Hmm.
seems actually comparatively decent compared to a lot of other countries. I thought I
Hmm.
saw like something around a 3% remittance fee, which is not too
Right.
bad.
Hmm. Yep.
So
Yep.
uh, the Philippines really isn't that in need of these new paradigm shifting remittance channels in the first place. Would you agree?
So that is so because you're in the States and the US has the largest population of Filipinos outside of the Philippines, the market there is tight, right? So typically, the rates get worse and worse the further out you look, right? So in countries where maybe the Filipino population only has, I don't know, 50,000
I
people, for
see.
example, there's 3 million Filipinos in the US.
Hmm.
So kind of it's a sizable enough market that those rates get pretty compressed. But like to give you an example, in South Korea in 2015, that was one of our launch markets. At the time, the remittance rate was like 7.5%, because there was only about 50,000 Filipinos living there. So, there was no need for competition to make those prices tighter, because there was basically no one else. There were no other players in the remittance market. So that's kind of just the free market at work, right? We came in, and because we were kind of using a Bitcoin rail, the cryptocurrency rail, we were able to kind of bring those prices down to like 3.5% or 4% or something like that. It was a very, very big discount for the Filipinos living in South Korea, but kind of globally, that's just okay. That's not
Right.
like that's not a massive savings.
So in other countries that I've looked at, when you send remittance through the official rails, like Western Union, for
Mhm.
example, the government controls, they have this official exchange rate that they control. The
Mhm.
government of the receiving end of the remittance, for example, in Nigeria. And they basically tell you, okay, if you're sending $100, here's how many local currency we're going to give you. And
Mhm.
it's honestly, sometimes they advertise it as determined by the market, but in actuality, it's really not determined by the market. And it ends
Right.
up being a de facto tax on the remittance.
Right.
Have you ever seen any sort of sign from that by the Filipino government, or is it quite, do you have faith that it's a true free market of exchange?
So I don't have a lot of faith in my government, and I guess that's the kind of that's the nicest way I can say that. However, based on kind of everything that we've seen, it looks like the exchange rate is a lot more freewheeling than you would expect from something that is being kind of mandated. It doesn't feel like it's being mandated. If they're mandating it, they're doing it very badly because it's kind of like really all over the place over the last year and a half. And like, say what you will about U.S. policy, but like, there's no way in hell that my currency is doing better than yours. But that is what's happening with the price recently. Kind of weirdly, the Philippine peso has been gaining strength against the U.S. dollar, um, intermittently, not consistently over the last year and a half. But kind of, it doesn't seem to make all that much sense to me. But like, it seems to be like an actual messy free market economy. That's how I'm kind of reading it. I could be totally wrong, and I'm just not seeing the invisible puppeteer. But yeah, it seems a little bit too messy to be guided, I think.
Luis, I know we're getting close to 30 minutes. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about living on crypto in the Philippines that you feel is important for people to know?
Well, I mean, the Philippines is a very poor country, and I think that's kind of the simplest way I can say that, right? So we're constantly looking for new ways to get by, right? And kind of one of the reasons why the Bitcoin thesis has a really hard time kind of taking hold here strongly is because the hodl strategy is hard when you don't have money. Do you understand? Like, sure, like I understand that if I can hold this for 2 years, then the reward is massive, right? I mean, we've seen that with every new cycle, but most people can't afford to do that, right? So they're looking for more straightforward ways to make money from cryptocurrency. And the things that have surfaced over the last year and a half are things like becoming a reseller on the peer-to-peer marketplaces, being a gamer in kind of this whole new blockchain gaming space with the kind of the Axie Infinity type thing and stuff like that. So I mean, I know that a lot of that sounds like hype, but let's just say that a lot of our customers are young kids playing Axie Infinity who suddenly have jobs now. They're not making tons of money from it, but they're getting by, right? And these people did not have jobs like a year ago, right? So kind of
What is the
the
deal? They play the video game and they earn in-game items and they sell the in-game items. That's what's going on.
essentially, they earn the in-game token. There's a trading pair between that and Ethereum, and then or they can sell it to Bloom. Bloom gives them pesos in exchange for that. So yeah, it is pretty direct, right? You spend a couple of hours a day playing a game, and at the end of the month, then you've got like maybe $300-400, which is way more than you would have earned
Yeah,
if
that's
you
a lot of
had
money.
had a minimum. Yeah, like it's better than a minimum wage job in this country, that's for sure. So kind of those are the solutions that have kind of surfaced here very strongly because the hodl strategy is hard when you're poor. And that's kind of, again, that's a very blunt way of saying it, but that's kind of the thing that has kind of coalesced in my mind very recently. Is like, oh yeah, okay, so I understand now why these kids were not really paying attention to me back when I was kind of talking to them about Bitcoin and all of that stuff. It's because no one can do the 2-year hold. It's
Mhm.
just too much. It's too long a time frame for the average person. Now, granted, if you got lucky, right, and you bought in late 2020, that is a very short hold. It's for like 3 months, and you'd be in the money for sure. But like the timing on that it's not easy, right? So kind of people are looking for something that's like a little bit more consistent, a little bit quicker, um, stuff like that. So kind of the when you look at the economy here, or the I should say the crypto ecosystem here, it's very very different from what you would observe in North America or in Europe. But I don't think it's that different from what you would observe maybe in Africa or in maybe even in Latin America, right? I mean, I guess our games are different, but kind of the idea that there's a preference for these. I guess what is Saifuddin's favorite expression for this? Like people with high time preference, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's the problem in a nutshell. Yeah, it's not necessarily a preference; it's a need, which
So
is a pretty big differentiator.
Back to you said you've really seen stablecoins move in on a lot of territory that Bitcoin used to be serving, you know, in the remittance game or just in the money transfer game. And I've seen that in many other countries as well, where stablecoins are moving in on that territory. Do you think that's kind of like some sort of uh, negative signal about the future prospect of Bitcoin? I mean, Bitcoin can do many things, but in my mind, this was always one of the really keystone anchor beautiful things about Bitcoin, and it seems to be losing that, you know?
I'm actually of the opinion that, Bitcoin wasn't so great as a remittance bridge in the first place for a couple of reasons, but the primary one really was that you had to do a lot of hedging on both sides in order to make sure that neither party was losing during the length of time that it takes to settle that Bitcoin. And that was kind of always the problem for us. Like, having to explain that all of those the tooling that we had to do on both ends in order to kind of keep the price from moving around so much, like it always felt like we were bending over backwards in order to kind of make this thing work. And that was a problem, right? And kind of the treasury team in kind of the money transfer operator businesses that we were talking to would have real issues with the fact that, like, there at any given time, this thing could move 0.5%, because 0.5% is typically what you're aiming for in terms of profit, like at the end of the day. So it was hard to convince them. Now, the thing about stablecoins is that they just move slower. And what I mean by they move slower is their price moves slower, right? Their actual
Right.
transfer is not much different. It's fine. It's at the correct speed, but the price doesn't change as much, and that's kind of what we needed, I think. Now, does it invalidate any of Bitcoin's kind of goals or things like that? I don't think it necessarily does, but I think that it emphasizes that the bar is actually much higher than maybe we initially thought it was. And Bitcoin has a long way to go. Now, so whether that is solved by Lightning or kind of by more technology that maybe we haven't seen before, I don't know. But in the interim, it looks like stablecoins are kind of solving that problem just by being less volatile. And like, we
Mhm.
always knew that they were, and that was always the reason why they even existed. And so maybe in this scenario, that is kind of what they're going to be good for, kind of as a stopgap measure, while kind of Bitcoin itself is still kind of trying to figure out how to really fill this need. Yeah, and I can tell you that this is learning that has only really happened in the last maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years at most, right? 3 years from now, who knows where we'll be at? It's all still kind of evolving, and the stuff that's happening in El Salvador, and kind of once we kind of see some more data about how people are actually using Bitcoin over there, whether or not Lightning is kind of facilitating these kind of safe transactions that we're hoping that it will, that is not just safe in terms of security, but safe in terms of volatility. If there's a way that it's helping do that, then you've got a model that the rest of the world can follow, right? But we need data. We need more data, and yeah, it's not just like a couple of small anecdotes. It needs to be like a little bit more. We need scale to
Mhm.
kind of really get a sense of this, and that's why it's like I'm super excited about El Salvador, primarily because they've agreed to be the world's guinea pig for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
For better or for worse, we are going to learn so much from what happens there. So I hope that, kind of we're not just all really, really blindly optimistic about it. I mean, I want to be hopeful, of course, but we need to look at this stuff very, very closely, because that's how the rest of the industry grows.
The way that Strike works is it's actually just a US a Tether account. So when you actually send dollars from one Strike wallet to another, it's actually not has nothing to do with Bitcoin, which is a little
Uh,
bit. Now,
yeah.
if you're sending value from a Strike wallet to a non-Strike wallet, that is done
Mhm.
using Lightning channels. In the case that Strike users were coming to Bitrefill to buy stuff. That was all happening over Lightning. But yeah, it's a little bit of the news was that all this Bitcoin stuff was happening, but really it's a stable coin database for the most part. So
Why was it Tether? Was that
um,
a decision that was
good question. I know they have a partnership with an exchange in the U.S. that has Tether, but you're right. I'm sure they have the other stable coins as well. So
right? Yeah.
that's a good
Hmm.
question. Why
Yeah.
didn't
I'd like to
Dollar
find
Coin
out
Square?
why Tether of all of the other stable coins, right? That's
Right.
an interesting one.
Isn't
Okay.
Tether the most volume
I mean,
daily?
it is for sure. It is for sure.
Yeah,
I
but
was
if
just
it's in the
wondering.
Strike wallet, if you're
Yeah.
just transferring it inside of a Strike wallet, you don't need those network effects of
Right.
the rest of the Tether network,
Right. Exactly. So kind of, I feel like no one actually asked the question of why it was specifically Tether versus any of the other. There's so many other ones that would have probably been easier to justify from a compliance perspective. But maybe the El Salvadoran government doesn't care so much about those types of concerns. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting to. Yeah, again, more stuff for us to learn, right?
Yeah. One way or another, though, almost all these stable coins, it seems like they're practicing some sort of partial backing. None of them are
Right.
fully backed, it seems, in that
Right.
they're taking some of their reserves and gambling on the open
Yeah.
investment markets with that money.
Yep.
And that's their whole business model, right? So Tether seems to be doing it probably more than the other companies. But it seems like all these stable coins, they're employing some measure of you know, I think they call it
It's fractional
rehypothecation.
reserve,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Well, we were trying to get away from that. So, I mean, if that's not a reason to eventually, like, kind of just turn all of this stuff back into Bitcoin at some stage in the future, I mean, that's one of the main reasons.
that's kind of how I feel
Yeah.
is we're undergoing this stable coinization phase right now, but there's going to be one of those critical black swan moments where one of the stable coins goes down because of their crappy partial reserves, and then that's
Yeah.
going to make everybody go back towards Bitcoin.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, knock on wood that it's not, I mean, if it's Tether, and I mean, obviously they're the ones that are, it seems like they're the ones that are always under attack, right? I mean, if it's
mm,
not regulators, it's kind of just internally they've got so much conflict. I don't know. It does bring the market down with it, doesn't it? And I guess that's kind of the big that's the like I hope that it's not a massive black swan event.
mm.
But, that's crypto for you.
Yeah, that's just another Thursday.
Yes, exactly. Right. Which is, yeah, I mean, what are your guys's what's your read on this market? Like, are we over 40 next week? Are we sticking around?
I'm 50-50, which is probably not the answer you want to hear, but it could go in
Yeah.
either way.
Right.
Reasons to climb, reasons to go down. I feel like, in my opinion, um, we've really broken so many barriers that I feel like we could do a flash crash as low as
Hmm.
20, but I just
Right.
don't feel like we're going to go below 20 again.
Okay.
There's there's too many network effects expanding. There's too many traditional big time investors that have kind of entered the market, and
Hmm.
they're what they say, as stupid as it sounds, but a lot of these old school investors in the US that they have decades of reputation that they've built up, kind of like the Warren Buffett types, but
Right.
he hates
Yep.
Bitcoin. But the other ones, like Ray Dalio or Paul Tudor Jones, they're
Yep.
coming into the market, gives it a certain amount of prestige that I think it won't go below 20. I would think if it flash crashes, it could go to 20, but I would say probably not even below 25. So
Okay. Okay.
that was my
So
thought.
every weekday morning, I write a very short newsletter to kind of like the Filipino crypto community. So yeah, so I was running out of things to write for tomorrow. It's like, God, like everyone just wants to, like, that's the only question on anybody's mind, right? I mean, are we gonna see 40 again? When are we gonna see? Are we death crossing? Um, and I'm like, oh God, I mean, yeah, I forgot my crystal ball back in the beach town. So I don't know how to answer that question.
I noticed there's a ton of Filipinos in the Middle East. Do you have any comment on that remittance channel, or is it very tight and competitive, or is there a lot of opportunity there, or?
Yeah, that one's so yeah, there's about 1 million Filipinos working in the Middle East, and that's like that's about 5 or 6 different countries that, kind of they're spread out across. There's only a couple of exchanges there that I'm even aware of. Rain is one of them. They're these 2 boys from Chicago. They're friends of mine, so they're are always trying to look for ways to work together. Yeah, the remittance industry there is tight. Some of them are owned by kind of the kingdom, right? So it makes it a little bit hard to kind of compete with them directly. It also makes it quite difficult to convince them to try new things. However, if the kind of the decree comes down from the king, then everyone falls in line, right? But that's not the case so far with crypto, as far as I can tell. So we've tried, and we do have money transfer operators who are kind of partnered with Bloom and working over there. But to my knowledge, like, crypto just isn't on the radar yet. Everyone has at least looked at it and is familiar with it, but it's not like no one's really even piloting it, at least not to the Philippines. But other countries possibly, right? Maybe to India, although India has a weird kind of stance on crypto also. Like, I still can't read exactly. It feels like one week India is about to ban it completely, and then the next week they're kind of, backing up and kind of changing their mind on it. And I'm still not sure exactly what's going on there. That must be incredibly hard to kind of work within that kind of framework. We're lucky here that at least, like, they figured out the licensing thing 4 years ago, and we're all just kind of operating under that, and that's fine. All of the compliance stuff that has to go into that, that's fine. We'll just kind of add it into kind of our normal business operations. But not knowing if we're illegal or not, that's tough, dude. That's like, I don't know how to run a business that way. So
yeah. Did you see the CEO of WazirX was like, they're summoning him as a criminal or something as of last week?
Oh my God.
For any
really
peer-to-peer exchange in India for a few years.
Oh my
so,
God.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I don't know. I don't know what that must be like. That sounds nerve-wracking at the very least, right? I mean, you must have some crazy commitment to your, crypto beliefs to still kind of be, like, powering through that somehow. That's rough.
Luis, thank you very much for coming on the show and answering our questions and staying a little bit longer than we had planned. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, guys. That was fun. I hope we do it again. Maybe I'll have some better news about, like, what's happening with Bitcoin remittances here in the Philippines next. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy being able to talk about the country, right? We don't really get a lot of coverage on this side of the world. But there's a lot of interesting things going on over here. Like, if you believe Misari research, about 15% of Filipinos have earned or owned some form of cryptocurrency in the last year. That's a really big chunk of people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's there's action here. It's just that we're kind of not really covered by mainstream media all that much. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Check out bloomx.app, and I'll catch you guys next time.
Cool, man. Thanks a lot for the conversation.